Hello to all of you introverted misfits who are tuning into this episode of the Introverted Misfit podcast. So, about 2 weeks ago, I returned from a week-long family trip to the beach, and I must say, I feel so refreshed. I don't know about you, but there is just something about being immersed in seawater, in that ocean water that just rejuvenates me. It makes my skin look so much clearer and better looking. And it feels so relaxing to just let those really calm ocean waves just wash over you for a couple of hours or more. I think I stayed out there for like 4 hours straight one time, just losing track of time completely because it was so relaxing. And the best part was that the condo we rented was beachside, so we got a front row seat to watching the ocean waves roll in and out and just hearing that calming ocean sound. But there was one particular day after which it had stormed all night long, and it was making the waves much more active towards the shoreline. And now I'm no scientist or oceanographer, but I guess the storm had caused quite a ruckus in the sea. So for the next few days, even after the storm had passed, it still had a lot of wave energy to get out. That's probably not what it's called, but that's my seriously unscientific way of describing what I think was happening. Anyway, my point is that just a few days before the storm, the waves coming inland were almost invisible. They were very small and very non-threatening, which of course made it much more relaxing and calming to be in the water. But there was nothing very powerful about those waves, those tiny waves. As far as you could see, the ocean was very calm and it looked very unassuming, actually. But when the storm came and it was ready to let all of that energy out, the waves became much more powerful and a little threatening. So, um, so threatening that there were very few people that were willing to go farther in the water for those next few days. I think the yellow flag must have been raised and people didn't want to risk getting pulled under. But what was so interesting to me is how from far up in the balcony on the 15th floor where we were and where I was watching these post-storm waves, they didn't look that terrifying or powerful to me. I even caught myself thinking, those don't look that bad. I bet I could handle them. Serious ego talk, I know. And I bet you can guess what happened when I decided to go downstairs and get a close up and up close and personal look at these waves. My ego was shut down immediately. You see, they didn't look so big and bad from a distance. When I got closer to them, I could immediately tell why so few people were willing to go into the water. Those waves were nothing to play with, and the few people who were going out a little too far were getting a run for their money in those waves. They were small, puny, almost invisible at first, but unforgettable once you got to interact with them up close after that storm. That's exactly what I think your introverted personality is kind of like. Invisible and maybe unassuming at first, but pretty powerful when the time is right, when you're finally ready to speak up and say what's on your mind. I think introverts are a lot like the ocean in a few different ways. When you're looking at the ocean in all of its vastness, especially on a calm day, it looks really flat and surface level, kind of like there's nothing really going on out there. But what happens when you go deeper below the surface of the water? You start to realize just how much life and movement and depth it holds. In fact, it's an entire ecosystem so big and extensive that there are more undiscovered species than discovered ones. Scientists estimate that about 91% of ocean species have yet to be discovered by humans. See what I mean? For introverts, the many facets of our personality and thoughts, say the 91% of us that is often invisible to the naked eye, those are not always immediately noticeable to others. But in the right conditions, say on a one-on-one basis, in a deeper conversation, in those nice and quiet environments that are more conducive to our preferences and communication strengths, you will be noticed and appreciated for who you are. Maybe not by everyone, but by someone and by the few people who matter. You, as an introvert, possess what I call quiet power. Not as loud and attention grabbing as our more extroverted counterparts, but just as valuable and important in the right settings. So I've told the story in one of my earlier podcast episodes about my extroverted, charismatic older sister, Ashley, who I would describe as the life of the party. And I talked about how I used to be really jealous of her personality back then when I still lacked confidence in my introverted nature. But her and the other extroverts in my life, whom I love and appreciate, by the way, they know how to work a room and get the right kind of attention by talking to more people at once, being on the louder side, and just being very out there and extroverted. And they don't even do it intentionally. That kind of social energy is just something that comes very naturally to them. Well, this whole conversation reminds me of a time a few months ago at a conference in which I found myself surrounded by way more extroverts than introverts. More specifically, we were on a lunch break on the second day of this conference, and by chance, I just smiled and waved at random, some random young woman who, she looked very beautiful and she was very bubbly and smiley and she seemed nice, so I just smiled at her and she immediately invited me to go to lunch with about 7 or 8 other women who were attending the conference. Now, side note, if you happen to be autistic like I am, in addition to being an introvert, you know that kind of random invitation to group hangouts or parties or anything like that is typically not our idea of a good time. We need time to mentally prepare for things like that. So I was completely caught off guard. And actually, I was looking forward to enjoying lunch by myself. But let's face it, we can't have it our way all of the time. These unexpected things happen sometimes, and it's good to know how to adapt and go with the flow when you have to. So I decide to go with the flow and go along with this group. But almost immediately, I could tell that I was a little out of place. I mean, these were the type of extroverted women to just start talking immediately, talking, laughing, joking around. They did not need to mentally prepare for that. They just jumped in and did it. They were born ready to talk, ready to socialize. So before I knew it, they had already kind of formed these different pairs and these groups within the larger group, and I was the odd one out. I had a very rough and awkward start, I'll admit. Even with as much work as I've done with my social skills and my social confidence, I just couldn't quite figure out how to join into the ongoing discussions and gracefully integrate myself into these groups. And for a minute, I had a flashback to those days in school when I felt left out of the friend groups in the cafeteria or on those field trips that we used to go on. And I would start to zone out and keep to myself. Basically, the same thing that I had always done growing up when I felt like I was being left out. And you know what? I could even feel a twinge of jealousy come up when I saw how easily everyone else was getting along and so quickly, too. But I didn't let it throw me off too much. I just moved on and tried to control those emotions, tried to suppress them for now. And guess what happened? Eventually, I got my time to shine. It didn't happen immediately, but somewhere down the line, when we were sat at our table and waiting for our food to come out, I started just talking to one of the other women who I was sitting beside, who seemed to be on the quieter side, like myself, even though she integrated really well into the group. And I started to build some momentum with the group. And once they saw that I was actually willing to engage with them and that I actually had something to say, they started to bring me into the discussion. And I had made some great new connections with some amazing women during that lunch, both professional connections and personal connections. But it didn't happen at first. I had to be patient because I went into it already knowing that I was sort of the odd one out in this particular group because I don't think any of them were autistic. I'm pretty sure. Um, in fact, the conference happened to be an entire conference about autism, and we were all introducing ourselves, and I was the only autistic person in this particular group that was going to the conference. So that's how I know that none of them struggled with this kind of thing. The point is, I was invisible at first, but towards the end, I won't say I was unforgettable, because that's a bit of a stretch for a lunch that lasted just a little over an hour. But I think I had something valuable to add to the discussion. It just took a little warming up to get me to that point. And that is completely fine, because eventually your value will be made known to the right people. It doesn't have to happen immediately for it to be valuable, appreciated, and important. So, just like those ocean waves, when they started to build momentum and cause quite a commotion when they were good and ready and they were energized by that storm, I want to talk about how you can harness this quiet power as an introvert when you are finally in the mood to talk to people and socialize. And you can do that by embracing and utilizing your introverted communication strengths, of course, which I've talked about many, many times on this podcast in previous episodes. And those are the power of introspection, deep thought, one-on-one connection, and listening. Introspection is the examination of one's own thoughts and feelings, or in other words, the act of being reflective. Your introspective nature allows you to truly understand your own emotions and thoughts regarding a lot of different topics and situations. And because of that, you can be particularly compassionate and empathetic to what other people are going through. It's kind of like when the ocean was in that very calm state before the storm. I would almost describe it as kind of an introspective state for a while, if I was going to personify this uh, thing. And then after that storm came and it was ready to let out all of that energy, there was a lot going on. It had a lot to say, a lot more than before. Introverts have a tendency to think about something for a long time without saying anything. And after they've mulled it over in their head and really had time to think about it, that's when they're ready to speak and converse about it. And because of that, we can oftentimes connect with them on a much deeper level. The power of deep thought. Deep thought is the ability to think about things below the surface. When you're purely thinking about issues and problems on the surface level, you're only going to come up with very superficial, temporary solutions. Just like the vast oceans that house 91% of unknown species and undiscovered territory, it's those deep conversations where real life-changing, revelations can come to the surface when you can delve deeper into topics because you're able to explore every aspect of a problem and get to the root of it. The power of one-on-one connection. One-on-one connection allows for much more meaningful conversations to happen. Now, it's not that group conversations don't have their place, but typically, the more people are involved, the more the conversation tends to veer off onto different topics every few minutes, especially if there are more outspoken, extroverted people involved in the group. You'll barely be able to get a word in before the topic changes. I've been there plenty of times, as I'm sure you have been too. And I must say, that's probably one of my biggest struggles as an introvert in when you're in those kind of group discussions. Like when I get caught in group conversations with ultra extroverted people with a lot to say, and the conversation just keeps taking turns and changing topics before I have a chance to think about things and process them and say something that's like one of my biggest struggles. And honestly, when that happens, I'm just gonna put on a happy face and try to participate as much as I can. But I really have to focus on just going with the flow like everyone else and not getting too invested in the topic, because I know it's going to change soon, especially if I'm interested in the topic. But one-on-one conversations for us, those are like optimal situations for the deeper connections to happen. And I think that is where a lot of introverts tend to thrive. And if it's not one on one, then usually it's just a few people in that group who tend to be more on the introverted side. And lastly, the power of listening, which is, of course, not unique to introverts. Everybody needs to have the skill of listening in their back pocket because it's a very important communication tool. But from my perspective and my experience, introverts tend to have a they're very good at listening because they already like to reserve what they have to say until they've thought about it and until they can mull it over in their heads. And so that is a really powerful communication tool that I think introverts do really well. Again, it's not unique to introverts, of course, but just one of our strengths that I think we really can harness. So when you're able to harness those strengths and use them when you need to and when you want to, that's what I call communicating with quiet confidence, like a true introvert. And not to extend this ocean metaphor longer than it needs to be talked about. But you know what was interesting about the waves that I kind of touched on already? They needed the right environment to form in the way they did. They needed optimal weather conditions and all of that other sciencey stuff that goes into wave formation and ocean currents after a storm. So maybe wind velocity and air moisture and all that other stuff. So what I'm getting at here is that in the right social environment, your introverted communication strengths can really thrive. So maybe they don't thrive at a nightclub with a lot of loud music and lots of people partying, but maybe in a quieter, more relaxed environment where you can focus on those social strengths of yours. Maybe communication strengths can't really thrive because you're trying to fit in with the wrong crowd of people in the wrong environment. You're trying to find acceptance where there really is none in many types of relationships, professional, platonic, even romantic. Now, if you listened to my most recent or my episode right before this one, entitled Can a Quiet, Quirky Woman Ever Find Love? I talked about my own journey of finding love as an autistic introvert. And I also announced my upcoming virtual workshop, Dating with Confidence for Quiet, Quirky Women, which is going to be held August 22nd, 2025. So if you're listening to this podcast episode before August 22nd, 2025, make sure you click the link in my bio in the description. Sorry, I got confused with my platforms. I thought I was talking on Instagram. If you haven't already gotten your ticket, check the description of this podcast episode for the link to register. Or you can go directly to theintrovertedmisfit.com/quirky dash dating. But in that episode, I tell the story of how I spent a lot of my younger years as a young woman feeling invisible to most people. including boys and men, when it came to dating and getting attention and all of that other lovey-dovey stuff. I mean, the most I could hope for was a short conversation with a guy that I would immediately, or maybe not immediately, but ultimately ruin by being too closed off and awkward. Um, and what I realized at this slightly more mature age of almost 27, I'll be 27 next month, or no, I'll be 27 next Saturday. Yeah, in just a few days, I'll be 27. Wow, time flies. Um, but what I've realized is that you may not get noticed first, and you may not get noticed by every person who you want to notice you. But just because it takes a little longer for you to find the one, it doesn't make you any less valuable. And the right person will see that when the time comes for them to see that, when the time comes for you to attract that kind of person into your life. It might seem like you're invisible at first, but there are people out there who, when they do eventually notice you, they will think that you're unforgettable. And even if you never find the one, I have to tell you, your life is not over. All right? Trust me, I used to have that mindset before I stepped into the dating pool. I I was just so convinced that I couldn't get any man's attention, and so I was watching all of my other peers easily get attention. And I used to, I had the grass is always greener syndrome, and just looking at them booed up and seemingly in love. But then when I stepped into the dating pool, I encountered some not so good men. And when I tell you, after I got over them, being single felt like the best decision of my life. It was so much better than being in a situation where you're attached to the wrong person. So, being single is not a crime, it's not a punishment, I promise you. But again, if you are a quiet, quirky woman who is ready to start dating, but you don't really know where to start, make sure to register for my workshop using the link in my bio. But enough talk about dating. Let's go back to the main topic at hand. I have a question for you to consider as an introvert. What good are your communication strengths if you're too afraid to use them, or if you don't know how to use them the right way? Social skills are a muscle, and if you don't use them, you lose them. It's kind of like that brand new pair of shoes that you buy and you're saving it for the perfect time to wear them, the perfect event, whatever it may be. But then you never go to the event. And years later, you look at the box and the shoes are ruined because you never used them. They just sat in the box forever. If you're one of those introverted misfits who struggles with shyness, maybe even social anxiety, like I once did, and you don't know where to start on this journey to becoming socially confident, I can help with that. My program and my coaching services, Communicate with Quiet Confidence, is specifically for shy and awkward introverts who are ready to stop being afraid of talking to people so they can have a normal, healthy social life without having to act like anyone that you're not, without having to act extroverted, um, without having to pretend like you have perfect social skills, just by being you. So, for a number of weeks, depending on which package you are best suited for, you and I will work together on a one on one basis to build your confidence around your sociability and your relational skills. And of course, again, the best part is you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not. So if that sounds like something that you need at this stage in your life, make sure to book a free connection call with me and we can talk about it. The link is in the description, or you can go directly to theintrovertedmisfit.com/coaching and read more about the program. That's all for today's episode. As always, if you enjoyed this talk, please don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button. Leave a review and or a comment whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. and share this podcast with a friend. Thanks for listening and have a great day.